Hello, Happy New Year to everyone. Welcome to the first podcast of the year from all of us at New Scientist. Now, this week we're going to provide you with a preview of the year, all the big events in science that you need to know to set you up for the year ahead. Now, that doesn't mean you have to stop listening to the podcast for the rest of the year. What it means is you're going to be primed, you're going to be smarter than everyone else because you already know what's happening before it happens, pretty much. So what we've done, though, is we've asked our reporters and our editors what's most on their radar for this year to give us a heads up. We've got the intel on the year, what the incoming US president means for COP30, the climate summit. We've got a genetically modified pig coming to market and GM bananas. We're going to look forward to some big results on Ozempic, which was a big story from last year. What else? We've got Supersonic flight. We've got geoengineering experiments. There's lots going on. But we're going to start with robots. It's a big year for robots. The Chinese government has actually called 2025 a year of humanoid robot innovation. News editor Jacob Aaron's here to tell us about what we can expect. Jacob.
Yes, obviously, robot arms and things like that have been used in car manufacturing for a while. But this is humanoid robots, so something with 2 arms, 2 legs. It can walk about, it can sort of use human tools, it can interact in an environment, so you don't have to build a special...
Do they have posh voices like C-3PO?
I think that's optional.
Okay.
These are already starting to roll out, and this year is going to be a really big one. So we've had some tests from a company called Figure, has been testing in BMW factories their humanoid robot. Another called Aptronic has been testing in Mercedes-Benz, and then of course there's Tesla. And it's an Optimus robot that Elon Musk is keen to have out there. So the car manufacturers really are...
But what are they doing? Because in car manufacturers, they've used them for years, as we said. But why do they need a humanoid robot?
So at the moment, if you've got your robot arm, it's on your assembly line and it does this one job. And if you want to reconfigure it, get it to do something else, that's you have to shut everything down, spin it back up. The goal is that if you can just have humanoid robots doing it, you can sort of get them to do lots of different jobs without having to reconfigure everything.
Okay, so this is the general purpose robot, the holy grail of robotics. But isn't that like super far off?
Yeah, so I think there are these products now that they're going to try rolling out, but it's still very much in an experimental phase. This is not, every factory in the world is suddenly going to have robots running around inside. There is a warehouse robot as well called Digit, and the company behind that saying they want to ramp up potentially having 10,000 units produced next year.
Wow.
Whole robot army. But the big problem really with humanoid robots is hands. Human hands are amazing. They can do so many things. They can pick objects up without crushing them. We can sense exactly how much pressure to apply, do really dexterous work. So at the moment, there's still space for humans when it comes to hands.
Okay, good to know we still have some function left in this world. Thank you, Jacob. We're going to look now at changes in the food industry because this year there's going to be some big influences on big effects on how we produce food, and the food we eat. Sam Wong is here to tell us about, first of all, CRISPR bacon, Sam, and GM bananas. What's the story?
So a company called Genus has used CRISPR gene editing to make pigs resistant to an airborne virus that causes a common disease called porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome, PRRS. It's a really major disease in pig farming. It costs farmers about $2.7 billion a year around the world. It's a long process to bring these pigs to market, but they are expecting to get approval from the FDA in the US this year. And they've already created hundreds of these CRISPR-edited pigs to prepare for a commercial launch. They're applying for regulatory approval in the major export markets for US pork as well, from Mexico to China. Once they get all of that, then they're ready to launch, and we're going to get mass production of CRISPR gene-edited pork.
I can't get too enthusiastic about that, to be honest.
I know you are a vegetarian. So.
Well, there is that.
Yeah, so for consumers, it's maybe not very exciting to have a pig that's resistant to disease, but, only 2 genetically modified animals have been approved by the FDA before, but neither of them are widely consumed. So this is going to be the first gene-edited animal to be used in large-scale meat production, and that could open the door to a much wider use of genetic technology.
Yeah, well, I kind of can get behind that because... Well, it's decades old now, isn't it? Genetically modified technology. There's always been, I think New Scientists, we've always seen the real benefits that can have, and yet there's been this big pushback over the years, hasn't there? Is that really what's held it back?
Yeah, so it is a difficult and expensive process to create a genetically diverse population of animals ready for mass production. So that's a factor why it hasn't really taken off. But also, as you say, there's this big opposition to GM technology. The first GM tomatoes went on sale 30 years ago. So this stuff has been around for a while, but there's been very little uptake of GM crops around the world, and there are no GM farm animals produced on a large scale. But if society becomes more accepting of gene editing, the potential applications are vast. And this example shows how we can make farmers more productive. It's estimated that globally between 20 and 40% of livestock and crops are lost to diseases. And if we can use genetic techniques to reduce these losses, that would have a lot of benefits from keeping food prices down, as well as reducing the environmental impact of farming.
Okay, well, I can get behind that very much. Although I am more excited about the genetically modified banana. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is to prevent disease. There's a really big disease called TR4. It's a fungal disease that affects banana crops all over the world. And a group in Australia has developed a genetically modified banana that's resistant to it. So it's already been approved in Australia, but that's one country where they don't have a big problem with TR4.
Right.
So this year they're going to be field trials in the Philippines, and that could be the first place to grow these bananas commercially.
Yeah, this is really not before time, isn't it? Because again, we've been writing about the problems with bananas for a long time. The Cavendish banana is the only one really grown commercially around the world. It doesn't taste as nice as the old ones that we used to have. And it's clonal. So the whole crop is very genetically undiverse, very vulnerable. By the way, I tried to track down the old type of banana called the Michel Gros strain of banana in London. I failed, but I do want to find it. If anyone can show me anywhere I can eat this banana,
I heard
I'd love
somewhere
to taste it.
Banana sweets have a kind of weird taste that doesn't really taste like a banana. Somebody told me that that tastes like the other kind of banana.
Wow.
Let's get those sweets in.
That's something we're going to have to do. I am happy that something's being done about this. Now, there's lots more food news this year. We're going to see people eating foods basically made without agriculture-free food. Climate reporter Madeleine Cuff, you've written about this for us, Maddie. What sort of things are we in for?
Yeah, so in parallel, I guess, to having food and animals developed with gene editing, we've also got a push to basically develop foodstuffs without relying on agriculture at all. So we've been watching for the last few years as labs around the world have developed new types of foods like butter, chocolate, ice cream, lots of delicious stuff that's made without input from animals, plants, or even any soil. And in essence, this means that the food is being made either using microbes or completely synthetic processes. Wow. And the exciting thing is that this year we're starting to see these foodstuffs move from the lab to the market.
Yeah, and you've so one of them is vegan butter, right? Butter in inverted commas, which you've tasted already, right?
Yes, I have tasted it.
What was it like?
I don't want to throw shade on American butter, but having tasted butter in the States, I would say the butter that this company Savor is making is much more similar to that than the kind of butter we're used to having in Europe. It's kind of milder, paler.
So horrible.
Not a bad imitation, to be honest. And they are a US company, so that tracks that they would be making butter for an American palate.
Okay, so we've got vegan butter, but I guess if you've got this protein, this is Solar Foods, isn't it? Is this the Finnish company?
So the synthetic butter is made by a US startup called Savor. They're still very much in the trial stage, but hopefully they will get FDA approval this year, and they plan to start rolling out to an American market. So hopefully our US listeners might be able to get a taste of this synthetic butter this year. There's also a Finnish company called Solar Foods that is making a protein replacement using microbes. Yeah, and that is essentially being used. You can use it as a replacement for egg and dairy, and you can make protein bars with it and high-protein ice cream. That's already available in Singapore, but later this year they're planning to do a soft launch in the US. So again, US listeners might be able to try some vegan ice cream or snack bars made with microbes.
I look forward to that, actually, very much. Thanks, Maddie. Okay, look, stay with us. We're going to come back to you in a bit, but we're going to change tack now. because one of the biggest stories of the year last year, certainly if you're a science journalist, was the rise of the blockbuster medications Ozempic and Wegovy. And now this year, we've got 2 clinical trials that are going to conclude to do with those drugs. Each one investigates semaglutide, and that's the main ingredient in Ozempic and Wegovy. And the trials are about whether they can treat Alzheimer's disease. So here to discuss that is our health reporter, Grace Wade. Hi, Grace.
Hello.
Tell us about these trials.
Yeah, so Novo Nordisk, the Danish pharmaceutical company behind Ozempic and Wegovy, are running 2 phase 3 clinical trials of semaglutide in people with early Alzheimer's disease. Now, both trials include roughly 1,800 people with the condition who will receive who will have received either a daily tablet of semaglutide or a placebo for 3 years, at which point the researchers will measure for any changes in cognitive decline or other hallmarks of the condition. Both trials are on track to conclude by the end of 2025, and if the results are positive, it could be a real breakthrough for Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and which would be amazing because, as we know, there aren't really any proper treatments for that condition. But so what makes this Novo Nordisk company think that semaglutide might have a shot at it?
Well, because a growing body of evidence indicates just that. The most compelling study is a phase 2 trial that involved about 200 people with mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease. And it found that 1 year of treatment with a drug similar to semaglutide, known as liraglutide, slowed cognitive decline by about 18% compared with a placebo. It also reduced brain shrinkage by about half. So really impressive results there.
Yeah. And what about the mechanism of that? Do we know how the drugs might have this effect?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? We don't know, but there are some theories. So semaglutide works by mimicking a hormone known as GLP-1, which plays important roles in metabolic processes like suppressing appetite and regulating blood sugar. Therefore, these drugs may be improving impairments in brain metabolism that we see in people with Alzheimer's disease. Another possibility is that it is tamping down inflammation, which can be excessively high in Alzheimer's. But ultimately, at this point, we just don't know. And hopefully these 2 clinical trials will help us better understand how the drug works.
Okay. Thanks, Grace. I mean, we talked so much about Ozempic last year, and it looks like we're going to again this year, which is really interesting. That's a nice, positive, hopeful story. I want to talk about geoengineering now. Which is a bit like the genetically modified foods we mentioned earlier, in that it's something that's been talked about for years, but not really done that much, but that's also gradually becoming more accepted, and both have been very controversial. Although the difference here is, I think that the controversy over GM foods has been overblown, whereas those over geoengineering are quite valid. And mainly the worry over geoengineering is that if we start using it, it will just allow people to keep extracting and burning fossil fuels. Sam, let's go back to you for this, because there are a few things happening this year that are going to move on geoengineering, aren't there?
Yeah, it really feels like momentum is building in this area. And as you say, it's very controversial, but there seem to be more and more scientists who are saying that we really have to be exploring ways to deliberately intervene in the climate system to counteract the impact of rising CO2 levels. So one thing happening next year is in May, there's going to be a conference in Cape Town in South Africa, which is the first or the largest ever conference focused exclusively on solar geoengineering, with a particular focus on research from lower income countries.
Yeah, because that's something at least, isn't it? Because often you hear that, the global south is most impacted by climate change, and it might be the most impacted by any geoengineering projects that we start mucking around with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So also there's the UK government's new research agency, Advanced Research and Invention Agency, ARIA. They're expected to announce the first recipients of a funding program. They're going to be giving out something like £50 million in funding for a program entitled Exploring Options for Actively Cooling the Earth. And that may include small controlled outdoor experiments, but we don't know where the money's going at the moment.
Yeah. And I wonder what will happen when those experiments you can't wait to see what they're going to do. It's definitely picking up, isn't it?
Yes. So we've mentioned the solar geoengineering. Another avenue that people are interested in is meddling with the oceans to make them absorb more CO2, for example, by making them more alkaline. And there's a startup called Planetary Technologies. They've already done a few trials where they add alkaline minerals to wastewater streams to see what effect it has. This year, they're aiming to restart the tests in Cornwall in the UK, and we might also see the first tests of alkalinity enhancement in open water off the coast of Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
I feel like they're less controversial than solar geoengineering. So,
well, they provoked quite a big reaction among local groups in Cornwall, certainly, and I think in other places. People don't like the idea of, dumping chemicals in the sea as they see it. But,
fair enough.
Yes. There's a lot of reasons why people in Britain are concerned about that kind of thing. But, yes, it could be a really promising avenue to explore. And, we'll see if it has serious negative effects or not.
Look, that brings us to the climate event of the year, COP30 in Brazil in November. Maddie, you're going to go to this. Have you got your visa already?
You overestimate my levels of organisation, Rowan.
This is a big one, isn't it?
It is a big one. Every COP is a big COP, but there is something about having a nice round number that gets people really excited about a COP. And Brazil is shaping up to be an important one. And yeah, certainly after last year's event in Azerbaijan, that was COP29, the pressure really is on for Brazil as the host to deliver a bit of a vibe shift for the COPs and prove that they really can be a constructive, positive centre of action for the climate community rather than just a 2-week argument.
There was a lot of shade thrown at the COP29, wasn't there? And of course, the big difference in this year's one is where we've got a new US president coming in who said he's going to pull out of Paris.
Exactly, yeah. So we can hope for a positive vibe shift, but whatever happens, a vibe shift is coming because we will have President Trump's administration there instead of a Biden administration. And that is big news, really, because the US are very influential players in this process. We're pretty certain that as soon as Trump is inaugurated later this month, he will withdraw the US from the Paris Agreement. But crucially, under the rules of the UN, that move takes a year to take effect. So the US will be attending COP30 in a kind of weird waiting game where they're still in, but kind of mentally withdrawn from the process, I guess. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And that kind of throws up a number of interesting potential dynamics. And there's a range of ways this could play out. But I guess the worst case scenario is that the US joins a coalition of the unwilling with other countries that are kind of there just to block progress. So I'm thinking the likes of Saudi Arabia here, and they might join forces to block action on topics like phasing out fossil fuels.
Imagine that. You're what are you doing? Oh, I'm in the coalition of unwilling. Yeah, I'm blocking progress.
They could all walk around with matching T-shirts. Yeah, I mean, on a serious note, it is really the opposite of what needs to be happening at these meetings. What really should be happening is a focus on driving emissions cuts. The current plans that countries have to cut their emissions are a really long way short of what's needed to meet international goals. I mean, hopefully new and more ambitious climate plans will be established before the COP. That's certainly something that countries are expected to do. But that won't be enough to get the world on track. So the summit itself will also need to demonstrate how we're going to close this so-called emissions gap between what we're aiming for and what we're on track to achieve. So one route at the summit could be that Brazil as host will focus on building multinational partnerships, so they could create coalitions around issues on deforestation, for example, electric vehicles or methane emissions. We've seen these types of partnerships done at COPs in the past, and there's an opportunity, I guess, for Brazil to do this better in the future. They could also choose to put more emphasis on the work of states and cities, for example, to drive emissions cuts, and that would be one route for the US to kind of circumvent having Trump at the helm, trying to slow climate action. And as ever with every COP, money is going to be an issue as well. I mean, one of the reasons that the countries finally reached a deal last year in Azerbaijan was that there was this big headline promise to mobilize at least $1.3 trillion of climate finance every year by 2035. And they only agreed to that because they were promised that in Brazil there would be a roadmap drawn up to get there, so that there would be kind of a feasible route to reaching that level of finance. So that's the kind of task at hand for the finance negotiators in Brazil, is to figure out how to get to 1.3 trillion, which is no small task.
Good luck with that. Now, to finish off with, we've been talking about excessive use of fossil fuels. Let's talk about supersonic flight, because that must be excessive use of fossil fuel. Jacob, it's been over 20 years since the last flight of Concorde, and Oasis are reforming this year. Are we going supersonic?
It's all coming back. Yeah. So part of the problem with Concorde, or Concorde had many problems, but part of the problems was that countries ended up wanting to ban commercial aircraft producing sonic booms because people didn't like the loud noises as they flew overhead. So NASA is working on a solution. People forget that NASA also does planes as well as space. They're working on a quiet supersonic plane.
Yeah, really?
Yeah. So their plan is their X-59 is the name of the plane, and this year they're going to fly it over US cities at over 1,500 kilometers an hour, and then they're going to go and ask people, did you hear that? What did you think of that?
I bet Tom Cruise wants to fly one, doesn't he? Buzz the tower.
But NASA's not the only one getting in on the supersonic game. So there's a company called Boom Supersonic.
They don't sound quiet.
They don't sound quiet, no. So their XB-1 plane is aiming to break the sound barrier for the first time this year, although the company have said they don't expect to fly commercial passengers until 2029. So that'll be a bit of a way yet. And actually another company, Dawn Aerospace, just about broke the sound barrier in 2024. They say they were the first commercial aircraft to do so since Concorde, but it's aiming to go much faster and much higher in altitude this year.
Just what we need is like a whole new world of air travel.
We could be working on electric planes, but instead we're doing supersonic.
On that note, we'll leave it there. Thanks to this week's guests, Jacob Aaron, Grace Wade, Madeline Cuff, Sam Wong. All the stories we've spoken about and loads more previews of 2025 are online at newscientist.com, and we'll put a link in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Do leave us comments, 5-star reviews, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.